This is Khatt Chronicles, design stories from the Arab world. My name is Huda Smitshuijzen AbiFarès, and I have with me today Haytham Nawar, Yasmine Nachabe Taan, and Nagla Samir. We are here to talk about books that we have published for the Arabic design series, and these books were published at the beginning of this year in 2024. So we are 4 authors for 3 books, and we will talk about our books and also their relevance to graphic design and to providing a nuanced and alternative design history. So let me start by introducing briefly my guests. So I have first Dr. Haytham Nawar. He's a practicing artist, designer, and scholar. He is Associate Professor of Design and the former chair of the Department of the Arts at the American University in Cairo. Hi, Haytham, and welcome.
Hi, Huda. Thank you for inviting me.
Then I have with me Dr. Nagla Samir, is also Associate Professor of Practice and former Director of the Graphic Design Program at the American University in Cairo. She is also teaching professor and author and researcher. Then I have again with me Dr. Yasmine Nachabe Taan, who's Associate Professor of Art and Design and the Director of the Institute of Art in the Arab World at the Lebanese American University in Beirut. She is also a member of the board of the Khatt Foundation. She wrote the first book in the series, and this is her 4th book for the series. And so we are very excited to hear also about her work in general. She's also a published scholar and a designer. So welcome, everybody. And for myself, I'm Huda AbiFarès. I'm the director of the Khatt Foundation and Khatt Books. Okay, so welcome all of you. And I'm looking forward to our discussion and hearing a little bit of your stories about your book. So I would like to invite Haytham to talk about his book, his latest book. Maybe you can also introduce a little bit your other books that you have worked on. But we will be focusing on your new book, Nagy Shaker, an experimental graphic artist of the Egyptian Avant-Garde.
So thank you, Huda, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and to be actually with friends and colleagues, Nagla and Yasmine. And happy to talk about actually my latest book about Nagy Shaker and my story with Nagy Shaker. And just briefly, I published 2 books before. One is like mostly known as the Arab History of Graphic Design with AUC Press, and the other one is The Language of Tomorrow with Intellect. And I will not talk much about this. Maybe it will come through my introduction about my research. So before really, I would like to, talking about the research process and about the book itself, I would like to talk about Nagy as the human being that I met in a very short time during actually my research in 2016 for a history for Arab graphic design book. In the process of looking for pioneer graphic designers in the Arab world, and since I'm Egyptian, so I would start looking and surveying the pioneer artists and then who actually would contribute to the graphic design field. And of course, Nagy Shaker was very known by his, in terms of graphic design, by his work in Sabah al-Khair magazine in the 60s, as well as some of the posters and cultural products like designs that he did for the Ministry of Culture, also used Shaheen film. So I asked Nagy Shaker that I would like to interview him. And at that time, he was actually 86 years old. I was very fortunate that I met him in his studio. So Nagy is the professor in the Fine Arts School. And he's known as a puppet maker, but also he is a designer and of the definition of today's interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary artist and a designer. He's, as I said, he's a graphic designer, spatial designer. He's a light designer. He is a costume designer, jewelry designer. He's a theater director, filmmaker, and a puppet maker. Nagy was born actually in 1932. He graduated from the Fine Arts School when he was in the year 1956. I'm going to meet a legend that he actually worked for 60 years. And I need to be prepared for that meeting. So I went to meet a guru, as you just said, an artist and a designer of the Egyptian Avant-Garde graphic artist. And I met a very humble, sweet man that actually opened up his heart first and then opened up the doors of his knowledge, his work, his archive, his library, walking around the studio, showing me everything. In like one meetup or one or two, we became really friends. And the extreme openness in his personality really touched my heart so much. So after talking, interviewing him, questions, which is actually included in the book, a elongated interview and with Nagy about his life career. Nagy took me in a walk within his shelves and his archive, and he asked me, Haytham, I'm 86 and my days are over. And I don't know what to do with all this archive. I don't know what to do with this library. And I really felt the responsibility about that question. What should I answer a legend like him? What should I answer somebody who knows much more than what I know in life and in art and design? So I told him, like, to be honest, Nagy, that all I know in terms of institutional archives is the Library of Alexandria. They have a great archive. And my university, which is the American University in Cairo, which also they have a great archive. But the library, they are more interested in artworks and to exhibit, actually. But and my university are actually interested in archival document and material more than actually artwork. Then he said, okay, then I find it, you will take my archive to the library and to the American University. And I said, like, but a little bit of like shy and awkward position, like this is not really my specialty. And he said, like, that's my only condition. If you want this work to be preserved, you take it to the library and the American University. And it was like, I felt like a sweet, talk, casual conversation. And that would be, that's it. I said, like, I would like also to exhibit your work in the gallery of the American University in Cairo, because he did exhibit his work in different retrospectives during his years, but always like as an artist. And I wanted to show the diversity or the definition, what to be a designer, and what to be an experimentalist, as he was actually saying about himself, like, I'm just only experimenting. He said, yes, sure, go ahead. We do the exhibition at AUC. And at that time, in 2017, I left to the US for a Fulbright postdoc grant. And I heard the news after I left that he passed away. He was very sick, and I really didn't know that he's very sick. So I was very sad that we didn't continue this collaboration, this also, at least I would say, short life journey. And when I came back, and I wanted to visit his family, his beloved wife, Vera Lagotour, and also his dedicated student, Dr. Mouneer Yahya in the Fine Arts School. And I knew from the interview that my friend and colleague, Walid Tahir, he's also one of his students. So I asked Walid, could you please connect me, because I want to visit the family and talk to them. And of course, Walid connected me to the family. And suddenly, during meeting them, I received a note from the wife that Nagy, before he died, he said to his wife, you will meet a sweet boy from the American University in Cairo. He wants to do an exhibition for me. Please help him as much as you can. And that was really very big responsibility. And it was very touching moment for me. And I didn't meet Nagy for long, but it was, as you know, enough what the time that I met. So I took part of my responsibility that I would like to, as he wished, to transfer his archive to the American University in Cairo and to curate an exhibition for him that tells the story of 60 years of his life work. And I was very fortunate that my friend and my colleague as well, Huda AbiFares, she saw the catalog of the exhibition, so much interested, and she told me, Haytham, that needs to be public, that needs to communicate much more than an exhibition that needs to be in a book. And I'm really grateful for that. And now we actually can celebrate that I finished my last task and I finished the book. And I would like to thank you, Huda, for that.
No, my pleasure. I mean, I remember when I was editing it, and I think like what you said, the personal aspect is really important. I mean, his stories, your interviews with him were very touching. Like you feel really close to the person that you're reading about, and it's also brings very clearly his personality. Like he comes across as a nice, fun, sweet man with lots of energy and creative energy and very positive. And it's also really interesting the way he tells his story and how it affected his design work. I think that you bring that really nicely in the book. I think I want to just stop you there and give a little bit more time to, I think it would be nice if we talk about each designer we're going to talk about, and then we go back and talk about more each book further. So Yasmine, would you be kind to tell us a little bit more about your subject? So your book, Mouna Bassili Sehnaoui, the first Lebanese woman graphic designers to brand her nation. This is such a again, talking about pioneers and women empowerment. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about Mouna and, your interest and how it started.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Huda. I'm really very happy to be part of this project, the series that basically makes accessible information about designers in the Arab region. My first book was about Helmi Touni. My second was on Abdelkader Arnaout. The third one, I had a discussion with Huda, and I said, you know what, Huda, we need to start thinking about women. I teach design at the Lebanese American University, where we started introducing this component on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm thinking, where are the women? So we need to start digging information about these women, because I mean, I'm sure you all agree with me. Women have been practicing design ever since the beginning of design. But the problem is that the work has not been documented enough. And I'm happy that Huda and I agreed to start writing about women. And so the third book was on Salwa Rawda Shukair, who is known as an artist, but we wanted to look into her design work. And this was an interesting initiative. There, of course, Salwa Rawda Shukair is well known as an artist, and there are many books about her as an artist, but there is no book that focuses on her design work. And Khatt Books has, the book came out in, I think, 2019. And so the next book, so the book that I'm going to be talking about today, is the book on Mouna Bassili Sehnaoui. Mouna Bassili Sehnaoui is a Lebanese artist born in Alexandria in 1945. I am lucky that she is still alive. So we've been meeting since 2018, on and off. The world has changed since then. And so I had to travel, came back, but we never lost touch. And we built, I was gathering information about the book and the archive. Thank you, Haytham, for this really interesting discussion about the archive and preserving the material. And this is also part of the importance of such an initiative that Khatt Books came up with. And so the archive, I mean, I have so many things to say. And so, so maybe just speaking about the archive, the Mouna Bassili Sehnaoui's archive is a private archive. It's a personal archive. It is at her, it is based in her studio in Lebanon. And so I would visit her in her studio, and she would every time, and we would dig into this, go down in the basement and start bringing outside in the daylight the huge posters, the thousand of brochures that she had designed for the National Council of Tourism in Lebanon from the 1960s till the 1980s. Also, this is, I also want to highlight here that the books, yes, they are about graphic designers, but they are also about history. And this book, in particular, it canonizes female contribution to the history of graphic design and the role of women, or the role that women played in establishing a collective identity and an image of a country. So going back to her life, so she grew up in Alexandria, where she used to go to this British school where she was not allowed to speak Arabic. She was taught English and French before her native language. She also speaks about how she used to listen to the muezzin, the sound of the prayers from the mosque in Arabic, but at school they only speak French and English. And I think I'm mentioning this because this is very visible in her work. In the colorful, amazing illustrations that we see in the book. I'm looking at them right now. And the language that she uses, that is, I can say, vernacular language, using the spoken Arabic, spoken Lebanese Arabic. She said in one of the interviews that she does not write Arabic, she paints it. So the way she looks at Arabic, the way she uses a language that is appealing to the young generation, but at the same time, she's using the traditional Arabic, but she's not, if we look at the way she's doing it. So there's something interesting in her illustrations. I want to go back a bit. So her life, so she also, she taught graphic design at the Lebanese American University in the 80s. She also taught design. When I say design, she taught courses in typography and illustration at the American University in Beirut, I think around the 90s. And maybe typography at LAU earlier, and then illustration in the 90s. But I want to go back to the period that the book focuses on, that is between the 60s and the 80s. And half of this period, we had the civil war in Lebanon. But before the civil war, it was we call it the golden period of Beirut. And so this was very well documented in her brochures, the posters, most of the work that she had produced for the Ministry of Tourism in Lebanon, that somehow, actually, I have to mention that most of the work is still used today by the ministry. And the logo that she had produced, we call it the Lubnan logo, the logo where she has written using the Arabic letters Lubnan in the form of an emblem, is very well known by everyone who visits Lebanon. But no one really knows that behind this logo, there's this woman who produced, like it was part of developing this identity of Lebanon. So the book is also about combining heritage and history, contemporary culture, and a traditional text. She speaks about, and not only speaks about, but she also has in her illustrations appearing personalities in the Arab region, such as Kulthum, but then she also has illustrations on the Beirut nightlife. What else? She studied. She studied graphic design. She is she can be spoken about as the first trained graphic designer, Lebanese graphic designer. She studied at the University of Arizona before she came back to Lebanon and was in charge of the design that was produced by the National Council of Tourism.
You touched on a few things, and I think that, the language issue and how she translated into her own illustration work is very interesting. But also, I think maybe you can talk a little bit more about, the importance of having a woman designer branding a whole nation. I mean, at that time, how did that come about, and why is that so important? I mean, she's clearly identifies as a Lebanese, but what I understand from the book is that she's actually of Greek origin, grew up in Alexandria, so she's Greek, Egyptian, and then somehow became Lebanese, which is also an interesting Mediterranean mix.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go into. I'm sure we all agree. We're not looking into her work as, this female lens. I mean, we don't really believe in that. It's not like she has this.
No,
female.
but I think it's interesting that she is being tasked with such an important role as a woman at that time. I think that for me, that's also important to talk about, because in a way, she is branding a whole nation. She did really give an image to a country at a time when it was trying to be like in its kind of formative years of independence and, development. And so I think from other than her work, the quality of the work itself, it's, the culture aspect or the sociological aspect of that study is, and that book I think is maybe interesting. I know also that you are also interested in more like representation of women and the way women represent culture and, the feminist theories that you hold in most of your books. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yes, definitely. I mean, I think what is important in her work and her contribution actually to such a job is that she is. It's. I want to focus on her hybridity, on her hybrid identity coming in from Alexandria, having origins, Greek origins. She speaks about her father, who used to live in Alexandria and apparently was a prominent businessman. She speaks about how she had to leave because of the Abdel Nasser introducing Pan-Arabism. And so part of the reforms at that time were to prompt the rise of the nationalizing industries in Alexandria at that time, in Egypt, not just Alexandria. And her father, being a prominent businessman, had to give away his private industry, and they had to flee to Lebanon. And this is where she had to felt that she needed to support her family. And so she initially wanted to be an artist, but decided to become a graphic designer, which at that time, this is also interesting, which at that time meant that was a career. It was a professional career where she was able to make money out of being a graphic designer. But going back to this identity, this hybrid identity that comes out, that is very present in her work. I mean, and this perspective, modern perspective of looking at her own culture, I thought was somehow interesting. Now, the word modern is very debatable. We can have another discussion about that. But this idea of illustrating the hand of Fatima for a certain emblem or invitation card for an event in Beirut, but at the same time brochures where we see women on the beach, and this is I think this opposing way of looking at a certain idea. But also hybrid, I think. And I think this is what Lebanon somehow is aspiring to project at that time. This image of what is Lebanon is very well.
But she also practiced as an artist. So in a way, she's kind of also like, maybe she's more known as a designer than an artist, but she was also an artist. Whereas like, for example, Salwa Rawdashi is more known as an artist, and she practiced also as a designer, or kind of combined the two. And I find also in her work, maybe, I don't know if you agree with me, but in her work, you can see the influence of her graphic design training or education into her artwork and her illustrations. And somehow I felt also the same about, Salwa Rawdashi's work as a sculptor, and then in that influence on her three-dimensional and also two-dimensional work. So maybe the hybridity is more than just like a personal history. It's also the hybridity of practice, like, Haytham was saying, this kind of like the multidisciplinary avant la lettre, like people were more flexible at that time with how they practiced, they're creative people, and they did everything they could they like to do, without being too constrained by labels, which we have, which is different in our time and age.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's a certain iconography that appears in her later paintings. But I like, I was speaking about the 60s and the 80s where she was practicing designer at that time.
Yeah.
And the book does include many of her illustrations and paintings that she had produced later on. And it is, as Huda was saying, it is really interesting to see the icons, the signs, the symbols that she had developed when she was practicing design. Appearing in her paintings in a different way, and this also the way when we look at them, we understand them as art, but then they started somewhere. So I think the book somehow shows this development, this evolution from the practice of design and how it fed into the artistic production of Mouna Bassili Sehnaoui. The book, in a nutshell, does focus on identity, heritage, modernity, post-colonial discourse, cultural studies in a nutshell.
Okay. I think I want to ask Nagla to talk a little bit about our book. I mean, we co-wrote this book together. It has a nice story.
It has a long story.
It has a long story, and I think it's very interesting, Yehuda, how both of us worked on that project separately first, and then and we brought the forces together. And sometimes we hindered each other's progress because of our other schedule. We really had to coordinate our schedules very tight.
Stuff.
But I was very happy with the result, and by the back and forth, I have to say I was very lucky to work on this project with you, Bigad.
I enjoyed it too. I think it's sort of interesting, like we constantly talk about artists. Again, Mouneer Al-Shaarani. So we're talking about our book, Mouneer Al-Shaarani Against the Grain, Exploring the Scope of the Arabic Letter. So this book has a long history. I met Mouneer Al-Shaarani for the first time in a gallery when he was exhibiting as an artist and calligraphy. He was exhibiting calligraphic paintings, and I was really really impressed by his style and I wouldn't even say his style, his multi-dimensional styles, multifaceted work, and kind of like modernist approach to calligraphy. But I always thought he was, like everybody who knows him as a calligrapher. Then I, at some point, was doing research for my PhD, and I discovered that he's actually designed a lot of covers, and that he was actually working in Beirut as a designer in the 80s. And then I was, interviewing him about that, and we were supposed, this was before even like the Arabic Design Library was even an idea. And then years later, then you can talk about, then I discovered that Nagla did an exhibition on him, on his design work in particular.
Exactly.
Maybe you want to talk about your thing, and then we joined forces.
Yes, I think this was our second encounter together. Like, again, you, Yasmine, and I, because we had our first encounter when we worked on Hilmi Touni. Consequently, we were working on Hilmi Touni was the very first designer to be covered by the series of Arab prolific designers that we are studying and researching and presenting design retrospectives at the American University in Cairo. And this is when we first met.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes. The second designer actually we worked on was Azza Fahmi. That was, again, looking at her work, not just as a jewelry designer, but how she takes her research and her inspiration, the process. So I curated an exhibition mostly of her sketch work, like how she sketches her designs on notebooks of recipes, and how this eventually translates into her jewelry design. And then the third exhibition was Mouneer Al-Shaarani. And for me, Mouneer Al-Shaarani was not just a designer, or again, I'm going to use Haytham's term of multidisciplinary art practitioner. But for me, he was a political activist who had a very interesting story to tell. Like, his story had to be told in a manner to actually retain his rights in his designs, because he produced the majority of his graphic design work during the Beirut time and afterwards until he came to Cairo. He produced it under a pseudonym. He could not produce his work under the name Mouneer Al-Shaarani. So to correct the history, this had to come out. This exhibition had to come out to give this man his rightful ownership of his work, a bulk of design work starting from the 70s and all the way till the 80s when he came to Cairo. And actually in Cairo, he started becoming known for his script paintings and artwork more than his graphic design. He stayed practicing graphic design, but for me, that was a story to tell. So the retrospective exhibition was red dots, no red lines. Of course, the red dots are very significant of his style. You can always see them in logo design. You can see them in book covers. You can see them in the scripts, the script design. But then the no red lines was talking about the human, about Mouneer Al-Shaarani and his tumultuous journey, starting his very young age and all the way until he was putting his political activism online at a very turbulent time in Syria. So I'm really grateful that we brought our visions together, because we both come from very different points of interest, yet they correlate. So that was part of our process. Like, who's going to be talking about this? Who's going to be delving into this? Because we are both interested, but our research, who does extensively more on the development of the letter forms, and then how the book covers are a big part, a huge part of his production. And for me, because in my work and in my practice and in my teaching, I'm very interested in branding and logo design and visual identities. So for me, that was very interesting to see this amount of work using the Arabic letter form into producing what looks very both traditional and contemporary when you look at. So it has been a very interesting study. And again, we are lucky as you, Yasmine, and as Haytham met Nagy, that Mouneer Al-Shaarani is with us. And we can always get back to the source, to the original source for the behind the scenes stories that have never been. So I think this is one value for this book, that it really includes the behind the scenes stories.
Yeah, and it was really good to have, like sometimes, I mean, what Nagla said about correcting history, that you write, you have a conversation, but then, we had always a conversation with him of going back and forth and like going into details. Of course, he's what I find also interesting about him as an artist is that he is unlike other people. He didn't start somewhere, ended up somewhere else, but he's been consistent throughout his career. So he studied graphic design, of course, on a university level, but even as a child, he was, as a young person, he was studying calligraphy. He was doing design work and for his school. He was like born designer, calligrapher at the same time. And it's interesting that you could see like he practices design as a calligrapher and calligraphy as a designer. It's very like intertwined within his practice. And that's a side that I only discovered as I did the research, which for me is really like exciting about the book, because I discovered something that I didn't know, because it's very easy to judge the work from like the end result. But once you know the story, once you know the process, once you start to like even, reading Nagla's analysis of his logo types brought another way of looking at them, because some of them, the work, so you kind of assume all sorts of things. And when you look closer, you realize, no, he's actually making really incredible inventions in a very classical calligraphic style. And that is very, very like eye-opening. So the analysis behind all these works is really good to read. And he also, what I find, even though he's a rebel and he kind of wants to change everything, he has a deep respect for the tradition still. And that's really, I think, like he's not breaking the rules for the sake of breaking them. He's just enlarging them. He's like spreading it, pushing the limits of it. And that is something that was really like by looking and reading and analyzing these works, you start to understand the work in a completely different way. You become like really enlightened. I mean, if I dare to say the word. But it was really a nice process. It was like Nagla said, it was really a nice process to work together because we had really nice conversations also in the process of how do we put this book together, you know. It's not enough that each one writes a part, but the part has to work together. We went back and forth. I really enjoyed it. I've never written a book with anybody else before, and this was a really nice. I don't know if I will ever do it with anybody else.
Likewise.
With Nagla, I would definitely do it again.
Likewise. And again, yes, I will do this with you, Yehuda. Likewise.
And it was very interesting to have, you know, again, Mouneer looking at our over our shoulders, sort of like, you know, giving us advice.
It was nice and challenging. Yes.
Yeah. No, it was good. It was good. And also I think we had the advantage of not only that, but also of translation. So we had a translation, like deep discussion about translating certain terms, the language. How do you write about, you know, his work in Arabic? Of course, his Arabic is better than our Arabic. Our English is better than his. So it was really interesting conversations that came up. And I think it made the text much stronger and much more accessible to a readership that we normally have, you know, challenges with. So I also enjoyed that part, even though it was really like, it was challenging, it was tough to do, but it was a good lesson. So it was like the whole process was, for me, an educational experience. So that was an interesting one. And it was interesting to also, like you guys were talking about, you know, the personality of the artist, how it comes through the work. Once you have this backdrop of their stories, you start to look at the work in a complete different way. So you start to understand like why this person why they behave that way. Why do they make some choices? I think that's also something that often you cannot get from just looking at images or having like a little bio of a person in a very big, you know, kind of survey book. So for me, I think, and I think that's an element that is present in all the books from the series, that you go deeper and you try as much as possible to get like the first-hand stories, because as you said, most of the time these archives, especially for example for Mouneer, he moved like so many times in his life. I mean, the challenge was finding his work, you know. Luckily he has a huge production and there's, you know, we could find a lot of printed books here, there and everywhere. We had to search for them, but at least they weren't in his private collection. His private collection was just not there because he moved so much, and with time you forget what you've done. So I think in a way, I think that documenting at least some parts is better, you know, as a way to archive this information is really important. And I think all the books in the series do that in some way or another. I just want to put a question out. Do you think it's important, this work that we do? Do you think these books are important in presenting a nuanced history? Are they useful? I mean, beyond just for graphic designers in the classroom, are they useful beyond that? What do you guys feel about your contribution? Yasmine?
Yes, sure, definitely. I mean, I just want to go back to the challenges that we had when the designer was alive. That what we're doing is oral history, basically. But memory betrays us. I mean, there was a time when, for example, I would share an illustration with Helmi Touni and he would say, that's not me, but then the signature is there. So I'll be like, no, but that's you because you've signed it, you know, this. And so the same with other, it's just that when we have the documents, when we have the archive, it brings back memory. And memory it's a lot of work. It's work. We work on somehow remembering and how to remember and what to remember. And I think, and also we end up deciding what to put in the book and what not. So there's a lot of politics in there as well, which makes the books even more interesting. And it's also about the way we see the work today. Within, this environment, the circumstances that we're living is something. Each book is trying to say something, to add something to the content. I definitely agree with you that the books are not only for designers, that the books need to reach out a broader audience. First, to show what how designers can contribute to society, to history, to culture in general. But the books, they don't only speak about design, but I think design is interdisciplinary. So while we write about design, we come across many other fields and ways of thinking. By that, I mean, we look into it from an anthropological lens, or an, archaeology lens, or even a psychology lens. So there are all these aspects that come together. But I think we can place these books under the umbrella of oral history because of the interviews that we've made and the discussions that we had with each designer.
I think it is really very important to really tell the story of those people. They didn't already make the work, and there is people, they should tell the story about that work. And unfortunately, for different reasons, like those reasons could be political or economical reasons, they didn't give attention so much to the concept of archiving the work itself. And so it's actually double responsibility. It's not just only to write about the work, but also digging deep to find the work and to make sure that preserved, and actually to make the analysis and describe it and write it and then publish about it and make it accessible for the masses. And it's a big responsibility. I would say that it's like a national responsibility. And here I find in the way, for example, talking about Nagy with someone that we work cross mediums. It's not actually about all his printed work. He did work for different disciplines. So I need to look at different type of archives. It's an audio and audio. It's like two-dimensional, three-dimensional. Some of them are digital, some are not, some are really in other institutions. And then looking at all this and try to write and to give actually an alternative history about the region, about the people, about the importance of our history. Because if we don't write about our history, nobody else will write about our history. And even if somebody write about our history, when I mean with somebody like the West, which have completely different agenda, different interests, write about it, they will write what they want to write about. But actually, it's our turn to write about our stories, not how they see our stories.
Yeah, also, I think, also in your book, you see that there's also another context, like a lot of his experience of traveling and studying and working in Eastern Europe. And there you can see kind of like also the relationship, the history of Egypt, the relationship between Egyptian culture and other like leftist parts of Europe. And that is a kind of like story, a subtext to the story. It's not the important part of it, but it's a subtext, and also all his influences and what he considered like good theater, good film. The way, like, who was interested in welcoming his, bringing his work, his theater work outside, what countries were hosting him. These kind of things are also like cultural history, and they are not complete. I think it's as complete as the material we can find. It's as complete as the memory of the person you're talking to can be. It's not a complete history, but it certainly gives like a new way of looking at also the region, because the region is not a closed off region. People like to categorize things and say the West, the East, the South, the Muslim, the non-Muslim, blah, 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 as if they are like, nicely packaged little closed doors. And it's not the case. And that's, I think, comes across in these stories. Even somebody like Mouneer Al-Shaarani, he traveled mostly in the Arab world. but he did like the whole Arab world, and with all its diversity, and and his stories of discovering North African scripts was very interesting. For example, it completely changed his view and his design work, and also his calligraphic work. It opened up incredible possibilities. And it's just by coincidence that he had to leave and end up there. Otherwise, he would have probably never made that journey. So I think that's also interesting to show like a more subtext, more historical subtext, and more, I mean, sometimes it's political, sometimes it's not political, but it is always, about what's happening in society and what's happening in certain regions, in certain periods of time, who was working on what, I mean, who was he collaborating with, who was sponsoring these projects, who were his patrons or his clients or his collaborators. It all tells like another story. I think that is the value that makes the book beyond just, the technicalities of graphic design and, craft-oriented information. Nagla, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I would like to add to this the importance of what we have been trying to do, what you're trying to do, Yehuda, what we're trying to do at the American University, is the idea of really highlighting the value of design and designers, because artists have been covered in literature, they have been covered in a lot of studies, and it's amazing. We're so grateful for this. But when it comes to graphic design and designers in the Arab world, it has not been covered as efficiently, or I think by digging through all the potential designers pan-Arab, we are bringing something that it's surprising that we never had this initiative. Like, we have books and books about artists, and then there is so many literature that covers Western, or I don't want to just say Western, like when I say Western, I mean Eastern European as well, design and designers. But there has been amazing and very rich design movement in the Arab world that we are just beginning to scratch during the past decade or so. And that's an important role that I'm actually very proud to be on the forefront of the group of people who are trying to do this now. And I think the way the books are approaching the design, not just for designers, but to tell the human stories, is making these books very fit for a broader audience than just the professional designers or the design scholars. It adds a lot of value.
Yasmine, you wanted to say something.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Huda. Thank you, Nagla. I just want to go back to the point where you mentioned, or maybe I understood that there is a general assumption that design is new in the Arab region, in the Arab countries. And so I think this is the value of these books, is that we want to say that design was not born yesterday. It's been there forever, since the first day when design was conceived in the world. The Arab designers have been working in design. It is not a new practice or a new profession. I want to add that the books, so now we've been discussing the content of the book, but I'd like to also speak about the design of the books. These books are beautiful objects, I have to say. And so collecting them is really, I have the series and I look at it, and the way they were conceived, thanks to Huda. So Huda worked on the design of the books, the layout of the book. So collective work. But I want to stress on the aspect of, the design of the book that is really well designed. It's not easy to design a book with English and Arabic merging together. Maybe you want to say more about this, Huda.
Yeah, but that's another story for me, a different presentation. But I think I want to talk about, it brings me to this idea of, even though they are a series, and they're not one book, they're not one personality. The intention is to bring as much diversity, precisely because we want to show that there has been really a lot of diversity in the region and approaches to design, whether it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional design, and also to kind of connect to certain geographical contexts. So to try to show also not just Egyptian and Lebanese, but also Iraqis and Syrian and this and that, as much as possible. Diversity within what we call the Arab world. And so I think the design had to kind of accommodate to that. And for example, like in the latest book of Nagy Shaker, Haytham and I had this discussion about the language. And the interviews that he had done, that he had recorded and then transcribed, were of course in colloquial Egyptian. And we thought that they should stay in colloquial Egyptian because it almost like when you read it in its original language, the person comes to life. And it also shows again the diversity in languages. Like we talk about Arabic as if it's this one language. I mean, it is one language, but it has so many variants. And I wouldn't want to call them dialect because they're really variants. They're very different here and there. And I think it was interesting because I'm constantly like learning from doing all these translations with different translators, that you start to come across, contradictions of like, I don't think this sounds Arabic. If, the Arabic that sounds Arabic to a Lebanese doesn't sound very Arabic to an Egyptian, or not very Arabic to a Syrian, or not very Arabic to an Iraqi. And it's sort of interesting, this diversity. And so in the book with Nagy Shaker, we kept the interviews in complete colloquial Egyptian. And when I read them, I only want to laugh because I'm always like, this is me. Sorry. I apologize to all Egyptians, but it just brings out Egyptian comedy in my mind. Of course, he is also lighthearted and fun in his way, but it was just funny, like fun to read. And then the Arabic that is like the official text of the story was a bit more stiff for me. But, that's just had to be like, it's like one language. And it's interesting in this book because we do have not only, like I could say we have 3 languages. We have colloquial Egyptian, Arabic, and then English. And so I think it's this kind of like diversity should also be reflected somehow in the design. I had worked with several interns during this whole series, and then 5 of the books have been designed in collaboration with Andrea Hayek from Beirut, very good book designer and really lovely person to work with. And it's not always easy because sometimes, like as a designer, you're kind of like somebody's worst nightmare as a client in a certain way, because you have specific ideas of how things should be. But this was a good collaboration. I really enjoyed working with her. Also because we kind of, it's a bit like me and Nagla. We just, clicked, it's like, it just happens that you have the same interests, the same sensitivities, the same approach to things. You can get along. And that's really important also for a design to work, because if you work with someone that is too different from you, it doesn't click well. And then you see it in the actual pieces. I wanted to ask you, so that I don't keep rambling about design, because I could talk about book design for 300 years, which we're not going to do. I wanted to ask you if you have one more thing you want to add before we wrap up this conversation. Yeah,
I think we should talk about, I'm talking on behalf of the 3 or the 4 of us, is that the process, because putting those, let me say, how many pages like that you see it in your hand, and it's the process of the research and the whole journey with the artists or the artist family or the archives, and then make the writing, finding the right material, and then documenting it, like scanning or photographing it, and bring it all together, and finding all, that's what I was just explaining, bits and pieces, like connecting all the dots to write the narrative and highlight what it needs to be highlighted, and elaborate more about some of the stories, or describe and analyze the work itself, and make the whole narrative. And how difficult it is to find material in an unrecognized or an acknowledged field in the Arab world, and also with a lot of challenges and difficulties to access personal archives, national archives, institutional archives. There's all this challenges that we face every day.
And also
as
destroyed archives, like some people
destroyed archive, which
completely destroyed,
for sure. And as Huda was just saying, so now we have the material. Now we start writing how to tell the story and give also, as the artists were doing, the spirit of like show the soul of the person that we are writing about. Because again, I'm a designer and artist myself, but I'm writing about somebody else. There is a connection you build when you are writing about this person, and then you explained it nicely about the Egyptian colloquial. Because when we read, she said, "Haytham, don't change this." And even when I did, when we did the text, and then I asked whether they would like to ask people to read, and the people they know check it very well. So when the people they read the text, they said like, "Yes, that's Nagy speaking." It's not just only to writing about him in the language that he spoke, but also the way how he spoke, the colloquial Egyptian, that his jokes, his mixed languages together. Because Nagy started in Germany and in Italy and started to the US, so he's mixing actually German, Italian, Arabic, and English, and then you see all these mixed languages, and that was him. And then give it to the designer, and then editing and choosing what to put where and how much you have to add or exclude. It's really a heavy duty job.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to highlight this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. It's nice of you to say that, because it's always like, I mean, I'm working very closely on the design with the designer. Sometimes I do the design totally myself, and I think that the hardest part is excluding pieces. Like, how much can you have? And sometimes you feel like you don't want to exclude anything, but you know that it doesn't help the story or the visual. So it's, in a way, like I said, it's always going to be incomplete because you cannot include everything. And sometimes even when you think like there's not enough material, there's always far more material than you can include in the book, which is always painful to like make these decisions. What do you do with it? But I agree with you also. I think it's really important to find, like, in the books, I think in every single one of them, in the 10 that we've made so far, you have a very clear lens or very clear point of view about the work. So it's not just like listing everything in a kind of archival way, in the sense of this happened, it's not just information. It's actually telling a story that adds another level, where the voice of the author is also present. And I think that's really very nice to see, that you have not only the artist you're writing about and their personality, but also the voice of the person writing, because you are looking at this work, at this person, you're analyzing it, you're showing also where you find, interest, their true contribution to the field. Our biggest challenge now is to distribute this material. Find bookshops that can put our books in, that have space for our books. I mean, we have only 2 bookshops that are really wonderful, one in Beirut, one in Dubai. And then the rest, I don't know, they get distributed around the world, which I don't know where they are. So the one in Beirut is a very small, nice bookshop called Snowbird Beirut. And the one in Dubai is called Hope, which is really beautiful name. Like, you love our books, and with a wonderful person who owns it, who's also studied graphic design or art. And so these are the 2 places that are like our bookstore, that we really love. And then you find them everywhere. I was
they are here in New York, Abu Dhabi, bookstore.
Yeah, and also in
I would say 80% of them.
Jamil has also.
I want to say that UN are now a very good option for them in Cairo as well. They're more than to have the series. They're very excited about the book signing we had here in Cairo, and now they're really looking forward to have these series.
Yeah, so I mean, they are in places where they are loved, which is really nice. But I found them also in the bookshop of the Venice Biennale, so that was nice. Because they were looking for, they had a couple of artists from our series as artists in the exhibition, so of course they collect material. But it's nice to see that they put, an artist, a design book about an artist in their bookshop. But yeah, so that was a nice surprise. So they are in enough places, but it's it would be nice to know who reads these books. That's it. I'm always curious. Nobody tells you, I've read your book and I really liked it, unless they meet you in person, which is very rare, of course.
No, they do, Huda. Come on.
They meet you in person. When they meet you in person, they do.
Yeah. I wanted to add that for me, the most exciting part of this whole process of working on these books is to actually get the book from the printer, to have it. Print is not dead. I want to, turn the pages, touch the cover, and hearing the feedback of whoever purchases the book. And I think the most touching feedback is when they say, I didn't know, discoveries things. As in, I know, that this designer did this. I didn't, they're discovering things through the book. But I also want to say that the most dreaded moment in this process is when I share the book with the person that I have written about, precisely because of all this discussion that we had, that who writes the story, how did we write the story, what did we focus on, what did we leave? Sometimes, they're a bit disappointed, as in, why did you leave this? Why didn't you put this image? Or why did you focus on that, photo that I don't like about myself? This is really, and you don't want to upset them because you've been living with these, they're the person that you're writing about for all this time. And you want them to be happy with the book. And most of them are, all of them are happy with the book at the end, but they always have little, comments, it would have been nicer, of course. And also I think that it's an important point to say that these books are introducing these designers. There's so much to write about them. There are, this is just to say that there's so much to say. And, we're hoping to have more design historians writing about these designers.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I've had two experiences. One designer, the first one I wrote about for the series, Camille Howard, said, I don't want to look at the book. I don't want to read it. I don't want to read it. And then when it was what came out, I think he likes it because he hasn't complained. But I think it's, I think he likes it, but he didn't want to read it. He was like a bit like, oh, I don't dare to read it. I don't know what you're going to say about me. And with Mouneer Al-Shaarani, it was different. He read all the text, and that was also interesting because he also didn't complain about the text. He actually, I think, liked the text because it told the right, a story that he felt he was properly represented. And our analysis of his work is our analysis. So there's nothing he can say about it, So it was very interesting to have these two extremes, at least in my experience, one that says, I don't want to read what you wrote about me, and the other one said, I want to read every single word, which is very scary, actually.
I remember Helmi once told me, he's a sweetheart. He said, I learned so much about myself through the book.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's
But that's the only Helmi Tony.
I thought only Helmi Tony would come up with something like this.
He's a sweetheart.
No, but I think that, one of it's interesting, one of the people that we made a book about, Mouneer Al-Shaarani, for example, he was really very excited about the whole series, the whole premise of the series. And I saw him just 2 days ago, and he, and he said to me, so what are you working on next? And if you want, because he has a great archive, and then he said, let me know what you want to work on next, and maybe I can I can actually open my archive for you. Or he came up with, did you know so-and-so? Or, so did sometimes also, not only was he happy with his own book, but he's happy with the series and he's happy to help, which is really great. So, you have all kinds of people. Dead people cannot talk, but I think we've written only about really good people. I think that even the ones that we wrote about that are no longer with us, or that you have never met in person, I'm sure if they were still alive, they would also be like very enthusiastic and supportive. Because I think they feel precisely how we feel, that this is needed and this is really a missing, blank spot in our history. On this note, on this very big statement, I want to thank you. It was really lovely talking to all of you. And I'm looking forward to our presentation together and on the 28th of June in Sursok Museum in Beirut. So if you happen to be in Beirut or you feel like desperately wanting to take a flight and come and see us, it would be lovely to meet you in person. But anyway, this is where we're going to talk more in detail about the books and then show some images or more images. So thank you all for being with me today, and I hope we covered everything we need to cover.